I know, but you have to respect the balance, remember?
I know, but
At first, it felt like a miracle, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet kind that arrives when someone is tired of surviving. A woman rebuilding her life, a man full of promise, a love story the world wanted to believe in. By the time she reached her 40s, she wasn't chasing fairy tales anymore. Those dreams had burned out long ago. She had already endured more loss, disappointment, and emotional battles than most people face in a lifetime. What she wanted now was simpler: peace, healing, stability, a future that didn't feel like a constant fight. Then he entered her life, unexpectedly, gently, like a fresh breath of air after years of holding it in. He was younger, charismatic, effortless in the way he spoke and moved through the world. He listened in a way that felt rare. He paid attention. He made her feel seen again, not as an icon or a survivor, but as a woman who had been carrying too much for too long. He spoke about tomorrow with confidence, about growth and purpose, about building something meaningful together. He admired her strength, her resilience, her history, or at least he said he did. And after years of feeling like she had to be strong alone, the idea of being supported felt intoxicating. To outsiders, the relationship looked bold, even daring. Headlines focused on the age gap, the contrast, the surprise. But to her, it felt like redemption. Proof that love didn't have to hurt, that connection didn't always come with chaos. She believed, perhaps for the first time, that love could finally be simple. What she didn't realize then was how familiar the dynamic already was. How deeply it mirrored patterns she had learned long before. Intensity mistaken for intimacy. Emotional closeness confused with safety. The comfort she felt wasn't just love, it was recognition. The most dangerous relationships don't begin with cruelty. They begin with laughter, with shared wounds, with the relief of being understood. After years of emotional isolation, they begin with the promise that this time will be different. Years later, she would admit the warning signs were always there, subtle, quiet, easy to dismiss. Small moments of discomfort, a tone shift, a sense of imbalance, things she explained away because hope can be louder than intuition. When you want something to work badly enough, you become skilled at ignoring what doesn't feel right. This story was never about age gaps or headlines. It was about what happens when unresolved trauma meets intense love, when survival instincts collide with vulnerability, and when a woman who spent her entire life enduring finally realizes that love alone cannot heal. Wounds formed long before the relationship began. This is the story she never told while cameras were watching. This is what really happened when the dream began to crack. Her story didn't begin in Hollywood. It didn't begin with fame, applause, or bright lights. It began in chaos. From the very start, stability was something she never knew how to trust. Her childhood was shaped by uncertainty, homes that never felt permanent, adults who struggled to hold themselves together, and an unshakable feeling that safety could vanish without warning. Even as a child, she says that peace was fragile and temporary, something borrowed rather than owned. By the time she was old enough to recognize fear, she was already living inside it. She learned to read runes before she learned to relax in them. She studied moods, watched body language, and understood when silence was safer than speaking. Making herself small became a survival skill, not a choice. There were moments when childhood should have felt light: birthdays, school days, ordinary milestones, but they were overshadowed by tension and unpredictability. She didn't grow up learning how to feel secure. She grew up learning how to brace for impact. Some experiences left marks that time cannot erase. Betrayal entered her life early, not as a lesson, but as a wound. As a teenager, the harm she endured didn't just traumatize her, it fractured her understanding of trust itself. It taught her that the people meant to protect you could also be the ones who caused the deepest damage. That realization rewired her instincts. Love became something to approach cautiously. Attachment became tangled with fear. Even kindness felt temporary, as though it could disappear the moment she relaxed. Addiction was present, instability followed, and while other children worried about friendships or school events, she was learning how to emotionally navigate disaster, how to recover quickly, how not to fall apart in front of others. Strength became her identity long before it was a choice. When she left home young, it wasn't rebellion, it was escape. She didn't carry memories of comfort with her. She carried strategies, coping mechanisms, emotional armor forged by necessity. That armor would later help her survive an industry that rewards toughness and punishes vulnerability. The world would eventually see her as fearless. What they never saw was how fear had shaped her long before success ever arrived. Success didn't fix her pain, but it gave her control. In a life shaped by chaos, Hollywood offered something strangely comforting: structure, predictability through performance, scripts to follow, marks to hit, roles with clear boundaries and expectations. In front of a camera, the rules were defined. Something her childhood had never given her. As her career rose, she learned how to wear confidence like armor, even when she felt fractured inside. She knew how to deliver certainty on cue. Each role became an opportunity to rewrite herself, to step into someone stronger, bolder, more fearless than she felt in private. Every success worked like a temporary shield, keeping old wounds at a distance. At least for a while, work became refuge. Long hours felt safer than stillness. Applause was easier to manage than silence. On set, she knew exactly who she was supposed to be, how to move, how to speak, when to show emotion. Off set, those instructions vanished. Without them, the unresolved parts of her life crept back in. Fame also taught her discipline. She learned how to control her image, her Body, her narrative, control felt like safety. If she stayed sharp, productive, admired, then maybe nothing could touch her. Maybe the past would stay buried. Maybe pain would lose interest and move on. But fame always demands payment. The more powerful she became professionally, the less room she had to simply be human. Mistakes were no longer private. They were headlines. Choices were no longer personal. They were debated by strangers. Her body became a topic. Her voice became a symbol. Her existence became something others felt entitled to analyze. She learned how to endure scrutiny with a straight face, how to absorb judgment without reacting, how to keep moving even when criticism chipped away at her from every direction. Strength became performance, something expected, something required. Still, she pushed forward. She chose bold roles, controversial roles, characters that challenged how women were supposed to behave, look, and speak. With every risk, she proved she was more than an image, more than what the industry tried to reduce her to. Yet behind closed doors, the pressure quietly accumulated. Criticism didn't disappear when the cameras shut off. It followed her home. Validation became addictive, and self-worth slowly tangled itself with public approval. Old patterns resurfaced, rooted in control, perfection, and self-punishment. She looked powerful. She looked successful. But she was exhausted. And exhaustion has a way of lowering defenses, making even the strongest people vulnerable. Especially to love that feels safe at first, but isn't. When she became a mother, something fundamental shifted inside her. For the first time, life wasn't just about surviving. It was about protecting. Her focus moved outward, anchored in something deeper than ambition or achievement. She was determined to give her children what she had never known herself: safety without conditions, honesty without fear, love without instability, motherhood. Awakened parts of her she didn't know were still capable of softness. It also exposed fears she thought she had already conquered. The idea of failing no longer applied only to herself. It carried consequences. The stakes felt higher. The responsibility felt permanent. Motherhood didn't soften her drive, it intensified it. She worked harder than ever, refusing to disappear just because she had children. She rejected the idea that motherhood required sacrifice of identity, even when society quietly, and sometimes loudly, expected her to choose one role over the other. She wanted to be present, powerful, successful, nurturing all at once, but balance came at a cost. Guilt followed her constantly. Guilt for working long hours, guilt for missing moments, guilt for being present but exhausted, no matter what. She chose. It never felt like enough. Even rest felt undeserved. Even joy felt temporary. She learned how to compartmentalize, how to smile through fatigue, how to promise herself she would slow down later, when things were more stable, when schedules eased, when life allowed it. That later never quite arrived. Still, her children became her anchor. They grounded her when fame felt hollow. They reminded her why stability mattered. Their presence made her stronger, but it also made her more careful, more willing to compromise, more desperate to believe in reassurance. Every decision she made afterward filtered through one persistent question: will this protect them? That question shaped everything: her career choices, her boundaries, her fears, and eventually shaped how she approached love again. It pushed her to seek security, consistency, and reassurance. It also led her to overlook doubts she should have listened to. Because when a woman is carrying the weight of protecting others, she sometimes forgets to protect herself. Meeting him felt different, not dramatic, not chaotic, different in a way that felt calming, almost corrective. He didn't approach her like someone fragile or damaged. He didn't focus on what she had survived. Instead, he framed her past as proof of strength, resilience, depth. He spoke about her pain as something that made her rare, not broken. For someone who had spent years feeling misunderstood, that kind of attention felt intoxicating. He listened closely, asked thoughtful questions, reflected her words back to her in ways that made her feel seen. After years of guarding herself, she felt understood without having to explain everything. Their connection moved quickly. Conversations stretched late into the night, layered with vulnerability and future plans. There was an urgency to their bond, as if both believed they had finally found something they didn't want to lose. He embraced her children without hesitation, stepping into their lives with confidence and warmth. He made her feel chosen, not tolerated, wanted, not complicated, but intensity can masquerade as intimacy, and admiration can quietly hide imbalance. She wanted to believe this relationship was evidence of growth, that healing had worked, that love could finally feel safe. Yet beneath the surface, something subtle began to shift. She noticed herself adjusting again, softening opinions, delaying concerns, convincing herself that discomfort was just fear speaking. Boundaries she had fought hard to build began to blur. Doubts were silenced before they fully formed. She told herself this was compromise, not erasure, because when love feels like a lifeline, questioning it feels like risking everything, and letting go feels unthinkable. Then came the loss that broke what was already fragile. The pregnancy arrived quietly, but filled her with a hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It felt symbolic, like life offering a new beginning. After so much pain, a future rewritten, a chance to believe again for a brief moment. She allowed herself to imagine a different ending, one where joy replaced endurance, one where love finally resulted in something whole, something lasting. It wasn't just about the child, it was about meaning, about proof that something beautiful could still grow from a life shaped by damage. And then it was gone. The grief arrived without warning and refused to leave. It was immediate, consuming, and deeply isolating. There was no gentle entry into mourning, only a sudden emptiness that swallowed everything else. No matter how much she tried to rationalize it, the loss settled heavily inside her. She blamed herself, her body, her stress, her past, her choices. Every memory became evidence in a trial she conducted alone. The world didn't stop. Her responsibilities didn't pause. Meetings continued. Expectations remained. But internally, she remained frozen in that moment, trapped between what was promised and what was taken away. Time moved forward around her while she stayed suspended in grief. What hurt most was not just the loss itself, but the loneliness of it. Grief didn't bring them closer. It exposed the cracks already there. She needed empathy, space, understanding without solutions. He needed answers, progress, closure. Neither knew how to meet the other where they were. Each response felt like rejection. Each silence felt heavier than words. The loss reopened wounds she had never truly healed. Abandonment, shame, self-blame. Feelings she had learned to bury resurfaced with force. Old survival instincts returned, whispering that numbness was safer than pain. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she began numbing the hurt the only way she knew how. What started as coping turned into dependence. And dependence quietly became collapse. She wasn't just grieving the loss of a pregnancy. She was grieving the belief that love could save her. As her internal struggle intensified, the relationship began to change, not all at once, but gradually. The shifts were subtle at first, easy to overlook. Conversations felt heavier. Misunderstandings lingered longer. Reassurance was replaced by defensiveness. Where there had once been comfort, there was now tension. Where there had been connection, there was avoidance. Each unresolved moment stacked onto the next, until silence became safer than honesty. Rumors surfaced, boundaries blurred. Choices were made, some impulsive, some avoided. That carried consequences neither could ignore. Trust weakened under the weight of doubt, and doubt quickly became suspicion. The safety she once felt quietly dissolved, replaced by anxiety that lived just beneath the surface. She tried to hold everything together: the marriage, her public image, her role as a mother, her professional responsibilities from the outside. She appeared composed, controlled, functional. She showed up. She performed. She smiled when required, but privately, she was unraveling, grief mixed with shame. Exhaustion blurred judgment. Emotional needs went unmet, then unspoken. She began shrinking again, the same way she had learned to as a child. When betrayal became undeniable, it didn't just end the relationship. It confirmed her deepest fear, that love, no matter how promising, always ends in abandonment, publicly. She maintained composure. She offered no spectacle, only strength, silence, dignity, privately. She shattered. The separation felt less like a breakup and more like a verdict. Proof that when she was at her most vulnerable, she became too much, too heavy, too complicated to stay for. That belief embedded itself deeply, hardening into truth she no longer questioned. She withdrew, pulled inward, built walls where openness once lived. Vulnerability began to feel dangerous again. The relationship didn't just fall apart. It reinforced a story she had been telling herself since childhood, that love is conditional, and safety is always temporary. And this time, the damage lingered long after the relationship was over. The collapse didn't happen overnight. There was no single moment that announced the fall, no dramatic headline, no clear breaking point. It happened quietly, in fragments, over time, small declines that seemed manageable at first. Until they weren't. Her health began to fail in ways she couldn't ignore. Sleep became erratic, energy vanished, mornings felt heavier than nights. Her reflection no longer matched the woman she believed herself to be. The disconnect between who she was and who she appeared to be grew wider every day. Addiction tightened its grip slowly, disguising itself as relief, as survival, as something temporary she could control. She told herself it was functional, necessary, that she would stop once things stabilized. But control had already slipped away long before she admitted it. As the spiral deepened, her world became smaller. She stopped answering calls, missed important moments, canceled plans, withdrew from the people who loved her most. What began as self-protection from shame slowly transformed into isolation, and isolation only fed the collapse. Her children watched from the sidelines, confused and frightened, as their mother became someone unfamiliar. The woman who once fought relentlessly to protect them now seemed distant, unreachable. Trust eroded, fear took its place, closeness gave way to careful distance. She felt the weight of their concern even when no one said it aloud, and instead of pulling her back, that guilt pushed her further inward, and then everything stopped. Her body finally reached its limit. The damage could no longer be ignored or hidden. What had been numbed demanded to be felt. In that forced stillness, stripped of distraction and denial, she faced a truth she could no longer escape. She couldn't survive like this anymore. Not for her children, not for her future, not for herself. Rock bottom didn't arrive with noise. It arrived with clarity. Recovery wasn't dramatic. There were no instant transformations or inspirational montages. Healing came slowly, unevenly, and without guarantees. It required patience, something she had never learned during survival. In the beginning, progress was almost invisible. Days were measured not by victories but by restraint, by choosing not to run, by staying present when discomfort surfaced. Recovery asked her to sit with emotions she had spent a lifetime escaping, without numbing them or reshaping them into something more manageable. She began by telling the truth, not just publicly, but privately. She stopped editing her story to make it more acceptable. She took responsibility without justification, faced her past without softening it, acknowledged the harm she caused, including the harm she caused herself. In recovery, there was no room for performance, only honesty. There were days when shame returned with force, convincing her she had fallen afar to rebuild. But each time she spoke that shame aloud, it weakened. Each time she allowed herself to be seen in her most fragile moments, the isolation lost power. Vulnerability, once terrifying, slowly became a bridge rather than a threat. Rebuilding trust with her children was the hardest part. It didn't happen through promises or explanations. It happened through consistency, through showing up when it was inconvenient, through listening without defending, through allowing their anger without rushing them toward forgiveness. Years passed before wounds softened enough to begin healing. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, times when progress felt reversible. But recovery was not linear, and she stopped expecting it to be. She learned to value effort over perfection, presence over progress. And slowly, something shifted. Love, real love, waited. They spoke truths that hurt, cried through anger, sat in silence when words failed. Forgiveness didn't come easily, and it didn't erase memory, but it created space for trust to return in small, cautious steps. Healing didn't undo the damage. It transformed it. What was once pain became awareness. What was once destruction became responsibility. Recovery didn't give her back the life she had before. It gave her a truer one. Today, she no longer defines herself by relationships. She defines herself by wholeness. That wholeness didn't arrive suddenly. It was built through repetition, through choices that felt small but mattered deeply, through learning to stay instead of escape, through honoring her needs without apology. She understands now that love is not meant to rescue you. It is not a replacement for healing, nor a solution to unresolved pain. Love is meant to walk beside you, not carry you. And only when you stop searching for completion in others do you finally feel complete within yourself. She knows now that boundaries are not rejection, they are protection. That intensity is not intimacy, and that being chosen means nothing if you abandon yourself in the process. She learned that real connection requires safety, not sacrifice. Her life today is quieter, more intentional, built on truth rather than survival. She chooses stability over chaos, presence over performance, peace over validation. She no longer chases approval or proves worth through endurance. There is strength in her stillness. Now, in the way she listens, in the way she responds rather than reacts, in the way she allows joy without waiting for it to be taken away. Her story is not about failure. It's about endurance. It's about a woman who survived what could have destroyed her, not by becoming harder, but by becoming more honest, by learning to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, by choosing growth even when it meant confronting painful truths. And above all, it is about courage, the courage to begin again, not as someone searching for rescue, but as someone finally standing whole.